So the first week we spent establishing Jesus, who he is, who he isn't. And again, what the reason I'm coming today to even reiterate that is to say that the reason why we did that, and now I'm reminded of exactly why I was really like, I think we need to go and explain why we've talked about this, is because we're entering what everybody I'm sure can identify as a pretty weird time on this earth.
Yeah.
The end times, maybe, right? Who knows? But that's what everybody's under the assumption of, because it ain't the beginning times, I can tell you that. Woo! And I think that the Father gave us a pretty clear heads up on a particular deception that's happening on the world stage. And it's not exclusively tied into religion. Now, religion is kind of its main exploitable channel, if you will, but it spans multiple categories. So when we first became aware of this years ago, I was struck like, yo, hold on, like, so I never really, like, every Christian knows that before Christ comes, I don't want to use air quotes, but, you know, as we've been told, so the story goes. That's what the air quotes mean. Before Jesus' return, the Antichrist shows up. But if any Antichrist is going to be good enough and worth their salt and able to deceive even the elect, they're going to need to create a red herring Antichrist, a scapegoat Antichrist, something that everybody thinks is the Antichrist at first, and then the real Antichrist comes and says, no, that was Antichrist, but I'm Christ. And by claiming that he's Christ, or Christ reincarnate, or Christ reimagined, or whatever, that will allow this Antichrist to actually exist as the biblical Antichrist, so that when the real Christ comes, there's actually like there's a imposter to be ousted. You see what I'm saying? Not where the whole world totally sees the Antichrist coming from a mile away, and then Christ comes.
Yeah.
So
look, he has red horns.
Right, there he is, right there, red horns. That's the Antichrist.
He's so
Don't follow
mean.
him. Oh God.
No.
Okay, I'm waiting on Jesus. You see what I'm saying? So you're gonna have red herring Antichrist, real Antichrist, Christ. Now, I'm not here today to talk about eschatology or the Antichrist, but I'm explaining to you this because this was my thinking and my heart and our thinking when we first started. He said, hold on now, it has to go like that. Before the real Christ returns, a red herring, the Antichrist reigns.
Before we continue.
I got some lamp on my beard. Before the Antichrist has its heyday, a red herring or some sort of like, ha 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 ha, see people, you almost trusted this fool, but they are the Antichrist. Follow me, I'm Christ. Has to happen so that even the elect that could possibly be deceived be like, oh, I guess that is the real Christ. And then the real Christ comes and says, blows the whistle and says, he's an imposter. Here I am. Hidden cameras, come on out type thing. So I brought that story up to say, I don't think people have, I'm not going to tell you what you are or aren't. I don't think I was aware that a false light movement was so necessary and so in the works already when I first went into this. I would have thought we're dealing with battle of good and evil. This world is really a battle of good and evil, light versus darkness. It took me being a whole 30-something and some change-year-old to be like, actually, I'm pretty sure it's not good and evil, light and darkness. I'm pretty sure it's light versus false light versus darkness. True light versus false light versus true darkness. And the true light and the true darkness rather and the false light are working in a checkerboard-like dance where you do this and I do that. You do this.
The good cop and bad cop.
Good cop and bad cop, right? And so it's obvious, and I'll use just a basic political whatever just to make the point clear. It's obvious that your Justin Trudeau's and your Joe Biden's and your Barack Obama's and your Hillary Clinton's play this kind of liberal-ish, kind of left of center, not entirely God-fearing lane. That's like, like they Catholic, right? Oh yeah, Catholic, but you don't never see them in church or mass or nothing like that.
Oh no,
your conservatives, your George Bushes, your Mitt Romneys, your John McCain's, your Donald Trump's, like they will play the Christian card, right? So that's a simplified example of the darkness and the false light, where Christians will look and go, well, I'm not voting for no Joe Biden. He believes in abortion. I'm voting for Donald Trump. He's a man that stands on character and principle. This is an obvious dark, a character that's wearing black with a hoodie on, right? Playing the role that's meant to appeal to the people who like that, right? Goth kids and all the atheists of the world. Then there's the rest of the half of the Christian nation that is Americans on the right side, and they need this light, something light to actually vote for. So they're given that. They fill that role just fine. But
given a really small box to work inside of.
Right. Donald Trump comes with 2 Corinthians. All y'all know is he said 2 Corinthians, and that's it. That's all y'all need to know.
What's your favorite?
The Bible and the Art of the Deal. That's the 2 best books ever. I always say it's the second best book after the Art of the Deal. That's all you need to know. Right? But that's what they do. That's this false light. So when I learned that, oh, wow, spiritually speaking, the New Age is an entire movement built on presenting the false light as the solution to an obvious darkness that they themselves expose. They call it the season of disclosure.
Yeah, and it's not only that, it's also with this principle or how they set up the Christianity, that everyone that confesses with their mouth that, that Jesus is Lord and he rose on the 3rd day and all these things. And now you're considered a Christian. There's no like character check or anything like that. So if a person says they're Christian, then that's cool, you know?
They're Christian.
And that's the problem. Like, you got to look at the fruits.
Yeah. Oh,
Do they have the fruits of it?
Not
That's how you will know. And I think that's why they water it down. Like, no. Yeah, he said he believes in Jesus.
Yeah, Kanye West is a great example. Kanye done said all of the above. Y'all went off hating him, loving him, hating him. Jesus is king, and now he back doing Balenciaga. It's like, see what I'm saying? See how fruits actually got to matter? So
you got to see a whole change and then walking the other way, away from all this nonsense.
Absolutely.
That you were doing.
Well, that's where the story gets more interesting, because that takes us into our 1st century drama. This was scrolls written, as they now know, that were stored at the Jerusalem temple, that were placed in this cave in 70 or thereabouts AD when there was a giant siege happening in Jerusalem. So it was almost like artifacts from Jesus' actual time or a few decades later shoved in the ground that just showed back up in 1947. That's cool. That's actually really cool. You can see certain pieces of the fragments. They do show certain pictures of certain ones. But anyway, there are, you see these scrolls, and you see that in many cases they're complete, and in other cases they're incomplete. So this is like exciting stuff for people who have dropped the rose-colored glasses of infallibility and are ready to kind of go like, give us as much clues as you can about this people group that the Caesars, the Herods, the Sadducees, the scribes, and the Pharisees, the Sicarii, and the Hellenists all hated. Jesus and his people. That's what we want to know about. Give us more details about him. Thankfully, we have that in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But when you really study that matter out, the concept of just this, Jesus was Christian, and he said, be Christian. And everybody's like, cool, I'll do it. The early church was so cool. Yeah, they were persecuted, but we don't really know what that means. We just know they were persecuted. I know persecute is a word we reserve the use of the word persecute for the church of the 1st century. We all disagree on who and what that was. Nobody's ever taught the concept of Nazarenes, Essenes, Ebionites, none of that. 1st century church. Or the early church. And this early church is all like, it's all just glued together. So when people say, oh, well, this has got to be infallible, it absolutely must be. I'm like, when they were burning all the texts of all the people who were writing so that we have Greek versions of a bunch of people who weren't Greek, like, I'm English speaking, right? If anybody wants to write a biography of me, if I'm writing a letter, you can best believe it's going to be in English, right? I might try to consult Swedish, but I'm an English person. Hebrew is a whole extant language. It still exists, right? Hebrew is an important and beautiful language. The conquering nation of Judea was Greece/Rome. So we have Roman oversight Edomite management, Edomite favoring, capitulating leadership structures. And all I'm trying to say is no scholar on earth thinks that we got some 100% accurate tale through several thousand years or several thousand languages where where the text spent more time in enemy territory than it spent in friendly territory. I'll say that again. More time in enemy territory than it spent in friendly territory. Now, I'm not sitting here bashing the Bible. I read it. I got all these books and all these things to kind of clarify what's going on. But this idea of, oh, well, God would have surely protected it, right? We have to, if that's what you really want to maintain, the bleachers are over there, okay? Right over there. All the actual people in the game are sitting here trying to actually work through the truth so that we can search a matter out as the duty of the kings that we are, so that we can actually get back to hopefully leading our families in a way that produces material fruits of both loving God in the way he asked to be loved, Yahuwah, and loving our fellow neighbor as ourselves, okay? So it's just important to know that by the time of Jesus, the first century, the priesthood was a whole entire wrap, okay? There was no more priesthood. I mean, well, let me take that back. That's not true at all. There was a priesthood. The priesthood system was a wrap in terms of integrity. So no longer can we just be like, oh yeah, Jacob had a son named Levi and Levi was super trustworthy. Ezekiel proved that ended long ago. Okay, well, Levi had a great grandson named Zadok. Zadok was trustworthy, and we can trust that his sons and his progeny managed this text until King James, or until when, right? Then you find out that the Zadokite priesthood basically got killed off, squashed, made irrelevant as far as history is concerned. Hillel took over. The scribal house is like, oh, we'll take him here, Zadokite. Yeah. What was that you want me to say, Caesar, so you don't kill me? Okay, I got it. Capitulation, agreement, being agreeable and going, right? Which was not how Israel initially was set apart. If you remember the original story of Abraham, Abraham lives in Canaan, in this giant Phoenician Mesopotamian sand bowl of fallen angels territory. And you should see what the book of Jubilees has to say about what was going on in Chaldea at the time. But it was a bunch of debaucherization, a bunch of debaucherosity, lewdness and licentiousness, booty shaking, booty popping, jiggling here and jiggling there, wiggling in and wiggling out, bumps and lumps and all kinds, everything. And Abraham stood as someone that said, in the midst of Ur, the city of Ur in Chaldea, Kasdim, saying, listen, why do we worship these idols that are supposed to represent the sun? Why don't we just worship whoever made the sun? Terah, his father. Abraham, you talking that jive. You better get out of here with all that nonsense. The goddess of lightning is going to totally strike you dead. I'm pretty sure that's just a tiny statue. I don't know what you're talking about. That's a bit new age, if you ask me, Abraham. How about you go back and live with your ancestor Shem for a while, and he'll instruct you on all that Noah, Yahuwah stuff. I don't get it. This is Abraham's dad, by the way. So he goes off for a couple years, comes back, and is like, Father, this is a problem. Has this whole ceremony where he makes dinner for these idols that are in his dad's house. He says, oh, you're an idol? You're not hungry? Like the idol? Look, I put food right in front of you. How are you a god if you're not even going to eat? I don't get it. Smashed his dad's whole room. Family got all pissed off. And it begins God's journey with Abraham going, Abram, as you were known at the time, I'm going to add a ham, no swine implied, into your name. And we are going to start moving forward with a new plan of restoration based on your original commitment to turning away from idolatry in the season of all this. Okay, this is Abraham. So flash forward all these Isaac, Jacob, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Zadok, okay, all the way, Ezekiel, okay, all the way down, keep it going, through Daniel, through Babylon, back in, through the Maccabees. Okay, now we're back into first century territory, 1800, 1900 years later. And we have this priesthood system that is completely Edomite run, okay? When I say that, I want to be clear that I am trying to put all the drip in the world that I possibly can put all the stank that I can possibly functify, little booty air, little stanky stank, I want it all to go toward your connotation, your understanding of the connotation of this house. Because as far as antiquity is concerned, in the prophecies, Jacob and Esau have been like this whole time. This whole time, right? So if Esau is Edom, and now they're in position that Jacob's sons are supposed to occupy, how are we really sitting here saying that this is perfect and God hasn't changed a single word in 3,000 years? I mean, God hasn't, but like that Edom hasn't changed it since they've managed it this entire time, basically. So then you have, by the time Jesus comes, it was a pay-to-play system. It was completely Hellenized. So I've talked about the upper social strata: Caesars, Herods, Sadducees, Pharisees, and scribes. Then at the bottom of the barrel, the people, which is the general population, right? You have your hyper liberals, your hyper conservatives, and then you have this little sect in the middle called the Nazarenes. That was Jesus and his crew. Hyper liberals are your Hellenists. That's just a literary term that means, I mean, I live in Judea or whatever, but like, I like Greek stuff. I'm Greek trained. I speak Greek. I don't even really speak Hebrew. I mean, grandma spoke Hebrew, but I don't really deal with that. I'm highly educated. Plus, Apollo and Dionysus and Aphrodite and Minerva and all these, like, I'm starting to embrace these cultures. I dated a girl once in secondary school who was, you know, she was from some Greek city that introduced me to these Greek guys that now, even as a Jewish person, I'm more Greek in my actions, thought, and beliefs. Those were your Hellenists. They were cool with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. I mean, they were cool playing along to get along, right? We'll say that. On the far opposite end, your hyper conservatives, and I'm using metaphors here, for example, but the hyper conservatives are your Sicarii, S-A-C or S-I-C-A-R-I-I, Sicarii or Sicarii. This is kind of translated to the concept of zealots, people who are zealous for the original Torah, keeping in mind they just came out of a whole entire captivity a century or two prior. So these were these are the people like today who go, you better get off my lawn there, buddy. I'm an American and I got American rights. And I'm telling you this, I'll blast your head off if you step foot on my property. Now that's, you know, a pretty conservative caricature, but blasting one's head off is murder, and murder is something that the Torah says not to do. So the Nazarenes didn't really rock with them. Like me, like the Nazarenes were like the conspirators, the conspiracy theorists of their day. I like using that because I want people to understand that this tiny sect in the bottom middle, this was Jesus. Please understand. This was Mary Magdalene, Jesus, Elizabeth, John, Zechariah, Peter, John, James, literally everybody in the whole book except for one character who we'll talk about later. But they were a part of this core that was not liked by the state. So we have to keep in mind that we're talking the conspiracy theory. We're saying the Hellenists were, yes, queen, oh my goodness, God loves everybody. Jesus, Jesus. Oh, okay. This was your hyper, super duper, hyper, ultra Hellenistic bathhouses, and we can share this and a little bit of that. A little oil, you need some oil, girl? I got you. Oil me up, I'll oil you up. Hey, baby, how you doing? Oh, yeah, I'm Jewish. Oh, yeah, Torah. Hashtag Torah. Holla at your boy. This was all the Hellenists, like most of the people in Judea at the time, most of whom were not even ethnically from the tribe of Judah, but that's a whole separate tangent. On the far right, you have the hyper-conservative. So in this middle, you have the Nazarenes, the Ebionim. Ebionite is Hebrew for the poor, or I should say Ebionim is Hebrew for the poor. As we know it in English, the Ebionites. This poor group of people was considered poor not by themselves, but by their onlookers, by everybody who wrote about them, because they didn't rock with these limp-wristed neo-hyper-super-duper liberals. you couldn't just worship Apollo and just give lip service to Torah, and that was supposed to be okay. The concept of being a scene was being a doer. That's where we do this. We don't actually just give it lip service. We actually follow God's instructions. That's why we're Nazarenes. The super pious ones, we take the Nazarite vow. Whoa, Nazarite vow, that's for the hyper, I am holy, holy, thee, thus, thither. I mean, they didn't speak English, but if they did, they would be saying things like thee. How shalt thou? Would thou like some extra mustard on there? You know, if they were working a job, it would be the holiest, right? That's the Nazarite vow. But that wasn't every Jew didn't take that vow. It was a commitment. Certain parents dedicated their children for that, like Samson and others, like John the Baptist, like others, but not everybody. So you have this section in the middle, these Nazarenes. They were like your modern day conspiracy theorists. And I'm using that on purpose because why? The average conspiracy theorist does not believe the liberal politicians, nor the liberal like social clubs, the unions and the BLMs and the Antifas of life. The average conspiracy theorist does not actually trust that Donald Trump or Q or anybody is going to save anybody from anything. In fact, two wings, same bird. Drain the swamp, right? Oh, the swamp that's totally not drained. But everybody got a warp speed, situation going on. Thank you, I guess, right? So we don't agree with either side. We definitely don't agree with these average pastors in the National Council of Churches because that's a whole entire hot mess and there's plenty of trafficking and all kinds of debaucheries, money laundering, drug laundering, everything going on in there. We definitely don't rock with Harper Collins or, Lucius Trust, all these publishing companies that own the text that when you go all the way up the chain, like basically just Rupert Murdoch owns everything that's printed. We don't trust them. We definitely don't trust the state government. And we definitely don't trust the federal government. So you can imagine how you have this tiny group of people at the bottom. So what the concept of infallibility is suggesting is that the Roman state that everybody hated, even half these Edomites, and the Edomites, who they selected from the house of Hillel or Shimei, these scribes and Pharisees, who were rich enough to pay for the position, all kinds of families, all kinds of bloodlines, wasn't just Levi, all that was way out the window. Not the Hellenists, not the Sicarii. We're asking that the record of this tiny group of conspiracy theorists was perfectly maintained this entire time. Because that's who the whole New Testament is about, remember, is this group that we call the Nazarenes. So the reason I've set it up like this is because I need people to just use their thinking mind, take belief and just put it on the shelf for a second. I believe a lot of things that I cannot prove, but in terms of my thinking brain, I don't have to believe what I can think. I don't have to believe 2 + 2 is 4. If I can show you on a calculator, 2 + 2 is 4. So the thing I need for people to keep in mind is that we haven't had a righteous leadership system that has been involved in managing the text for minimum 2,500 years, if not longer, okay? So this is what infallibility folk are suggesting. They're asking us to ignore all of history and how actual captivity works and just pretend that Rome, right? Remember the Vatican, Codex Vaticanus, the actual oldest Bible existing in the bottom of the Vatican library, that Rome perfectly maintained God's word while they murdered God's son. And then they burnt and murdered all the followers and apostles and most of the disciples that were following God's son. Okay, that's what we're asking. That's what we're asked to believe by the state, not the book. The book don't say that, but the state. Okay. So we have Jesus' story. So all this comes in. So by the first century, Jesus' story in Matthew, Mark, and in Luke is called the Synoptic Gospels because they were thought to be derived from the same source. Now, imagine my surprise as I begin to enter the mature gentleman's table where that guy over there's got a bow tie on and he's got 8 letters behind his name. And I'm on Zoom calls with these people privately, like public, but not like public, right? Just Zoom that we were invited to join. And we're learning about the formation of the canon over years of just Sabbath studies and just studies throughout the week. Because again, I took just time off. I was like, this is a whole trick bag, and I'm just gonna put the whole pause on everything in life till I figure this out. I basically was too broke to keep doing that in 2018, so that's when I started working again. My wife was like, baby, I'm hungry, okay? Please get it together. So I did. You find out that basically Mark is what's believed to be the source of the Gospel's story, and that the historian Luke and the later writer, whoever wrote Matthew, were copying Mark, the Greek Mark, as a basis for their writings, and that Mark is here. It doesn't have anything to say about Jesus' birth, genealogy, nothing. It just starts off pretty much at the baptism. And then Matthew and Luke come to give additional information about time prior to when Mark picks up. Then you have John's gospel. John really being the only one who was there physically to witness what happened. And as historical paleography goes, the book of Revelation ends up being written sometime around the 50s or 60s, and the book of John, the Gospel of John, is written toward the end of John's life. Because he was on Patmos while he wrote Revelation, but John got released from Patmos. I always thought he died there, but I guess when I started actually looking at the text, I was like, oh, it says right here, he clearly was released. Okay, got it. So in this first century, there is no Bible. Remember that. There is no Bible. There's Torah, prophets, and writings. So anything that's New Testament is entirely under the Roman editorial system. So at this point, most Christians know this. They just believe that God protected the text and the record through the Roman editorial process. I don't know why they believe that, but they do. That's what I believed. I don't know why I believed it. Nobody told me that. I just assumed that he must have, because it's infallible, right? That's what I was born being told. And even though the book doesn't say that it is, and there's plenty of injections that it's not, here we are. So now we're in New Testament time period. And most of Christianity, if you've not been living under a rock, is New Testament centric. They give very, 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 very little lip service to the Old Testament. There's New Testament, New Covenant, New Testament. Jesus, never mind Yahweh. Jesus equals Yahweh. So we don't even need to say Yahweh anymore. I know it says Exodus chapter 20. I happened to flip right open to it. How about that? Verse 7. You do not bring the name of Yahweh, your Elohim, to naught. For Yahweh does not leave the one unpunished who brings his name to naught. Now, you see that concept, bringing something to naught, N-A-U-G-H-T, bringing it to non-existence. Oh, and so will be anybody, who disobeys, or, this army is sacked, or this nation is captured, and their seed and their lineage is rendered to naught. It has to do with, like, snuffing something out, like a fire, and just dissolving it, and then ashes scattering it, like Thanos or whatever. And then in a couple decades, a couple centuries, nobody's even heard of it. It's kind of been rendered to naught. So he's saying, don't take the name Yahweh and render it to naught. And my little 30-something-year-old behind at the time was like, well, hold on, that's exactly what we've done. We've taken Jesus, replaced Yahweh. Yahweh is fully rendered to naught in most people's minds and mouths. And I was always under the impression that Jesus, I know he's written about in these texts, but I guess I never really stopped to think that between Jesus' life, death, resurrection, and ascension, and the canonization, the encapsulation, the glue and the spine and the first and last page number of this record, 350 years of time passed, and it was entirely managed by the Roman pen. So I'm trying to do the best job I can at not dropping too much drip on the book and just saying, y'all, I think people have gotten to a place where this has become idolized in people's minds. They didn't mean to do it. I know plenty of Christians who would never tell you I've made the Bible into an idol, but in the practice, that's kind of what they've done, because they go with what they're told about a thing more than history has to even say about that thing, or what that thing even says about itself. So after Jesus, so now I'm going to kind of speed through the rest of this because it's already kind of being belabored. So it's really important to know the social strata of the Nazarenes in this era. I've already talked about that. The Caesar's class, the Herodian class, the Sadducee class. And the Sadducees had a lot going on because they were the money folk. They would be like your Rockefellers or your Rothschilds of today. Anybody heard those last names? Want to tell me how much influence Nelson D. Rockefeller himself has had over the text that all of us read? Not so much the Bible, but like every other text. Who the Murdoch family is, what News Corp is, who owns Zondervan or Simon & Schuster or HarperCollins or any of these major publishing houses that publish usually Christian literature. Yeah, one family, and that family may or may not care about your own spiritual well-being. You see how this works? Okay. So the first century happens. Yeshua and his group are the first century time transpires. Yeshua and his crew are already infamous. He's healing people. He's fixing limbs and healing the sick and casting out demons and telling people, go, your sins are forgiven, go and sin no more, before he's actually died. So clearly he wasn't an atonement for their sin because their sins were forgiven and he wasn't dead yet, right? But he becomes such a problem for the state because all he kept doing was saying, the priesthood is illegitimate, yeah. The priesthood is illegitimate. That's what Jesus was basically doing in practice the whole time, his whole ministry. How many of them high priests done healed your foot? None? Okay, great. You've been shutting up the keys to the kingdom for your people. Let me show you how the kingdom of hand is at now. Boom, bam, blah-dow. That's what Jesus was doing at the time. Plus, don't follow these knuckleheads and be like a conspiracy theorist. Here's some healing modalities. We can't talk about them because we'll get fact-checked. Don't trust your pharmaceutical company. Don't trust what the government's giving you for free. And what happens when we do that? Fact check, delete, trash can. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Here's a state-sponsored expert that says otherwise. This is the same thing we dealt with in the first century with Judea. So in the first century of Judea, your Nazarenes scatter. And I was always told, after Jesus, Christianity soared through the empire. Not true. Christianity was over here. That was just Rome's title for what was going on. The Nazarene way, followers of the way who called themselves Nazarenes, who some Greeks called Essenes because they were the doers of the Torah, the Osayers of the Torah. So Esse, Osay, Osi, Esse becomes basically the same word. If anybody knows anything about vowels, none of these ancient languages had vowels in them. So E-S-S-E-N or O-S-S-E-A-N is basically the same word, okay? Then you have your Ebionim, which was what everybody called them, the pejorative kind of derogatory name about how poor they seemed to be in the face of the social Greek culture. They were being heavily taxed, so basically everybody was kind of poor. Kind of like today, right? But they were also, they had communal living and they shared everything, so they didn't have a lot of stuff, so they seemed extra poor. This group and their return to the Torah, like Jesus was setting forth, like after Jesus died, his brother James was helping establish as the righteous, just one, James the Just, the leader of the Jerusalem assembly, the true early church that Roman, seminaries will not tell you that much about because they don't really want you to know that. They want you to think Constantine and Christianity, Christianity.com. You see this? Christianity through the Roman pen. Just this. Don't look at the Ebionites. Look right here. Constantine, wrong, right? That's what they want people to do, is just view it through this one lens. History is always told through the lens of the victor. But we all know that that's not usually true most of the time, usually, okay? Mature conversations. Let's keep. So the first century sects all scattered. The Dead Sea Scrolls are a witness to this. What happens? The siege of Jerusalem, 68 or something, 67, 68 AD to 73 AD. Rome's coming up in here. This is a problem. Judea, y'all getting on my nerves. This whole Yeshua, he messing up my money. I don't like him. Jesus and everything related to Jesus got to go. He was over there talking about, stop doing this, stop doing that. This is how we make all our money. They roll on Yeshua. Later, the same, as it turns out, high priest family, the Onias high priest dynasty, goes and the father who was responsible for getting Jesus and one of his other brothers killed, and some of the disciples, Ananias, had a son, Ananias, who was responsible for getting James the Just killed. That's Jesus' brother, who was in charge of the affairs of Jesus' movement after Jesus went on to be with the Lord. You get what I'm saying. So Jesus' brother was pretty infamous. He was known as having knees like camels. He's written about as having James, that is Jacob, who King James just changed to James. I'm saying James so y'all know who I'm talking about. Had knees that were like camels because he spent so much time on his knees in prayer. This is the actual crew of Jesus and his folk, right? They did not enter or rock with or deal with the temple system. They would go up to Solomon's porch. They would go up to the portico. They would go to the outer area, but they didn't go in because they didn't agree with what was happening in this Babylonian managed temple system from 200 to 300 to 400 years prior, as the Maccabean revolt helped establish. So again, we're talking chronology. Old Testament, Daniel, Babylon captivity. All right, it's time for Israel to be liberated again. A Hasmonean/Maccabee revolt. Cool, but you keep our king and our high priest in your leadership. Great. Herod the Great. Kill all the boys 2 and under. Jesus and his crew flee to Egypt for a few years. They come back. How he wasn't the only something-teen-year-old at the time, who knows? Male, anyway, who knows? But then you have his life, his ministry. Then you have his death, his resurrection, and his disciples' ministry after his ascension that continues to proliferate and get a groundswell of knowledge. This would be something like the equivalent of the 9/11 conspiracy gaining steam. Now, I'm not belittling Jesus's whole gospel and mission down to just 9/11. I'm just saying, if the conspiracy theorists are starting to talk and their healing methods and essential oils and all these alternative healing modalities are starting to usurp the pharmaceutical hustle, the government hustle, the institutionalized healthcare hustle. Meanwhile, we're throwing some shade on 9/11, showing y'all what the government really did and how they really wasn't being honest. This is all how the spread of, this is the way you need to couch how Jesus's movement really spread, because that is actually, let me not tell you what to do. This is the way I have come to learn and couch Jesus's movement, because Jesus's movement was not state-sponsored until much later at all. In fact, it was state-snuffed. Kill him! So they scatter. They, all kinds of persecution goes on. Even Peter, like, yo, you know this Yeshua? I'm gonna kill you if you say you do. Jesus, yeah, no, I think I heard him. Yeshua, right? Yeah, no, I heard him. He was healing somebody. Yeah, I heard him. Pretty sure I think I might have heard he was over there. Uber, quickly, get me to Caesarea Philippi. Stat, 30 minutes long. Give me a donkey, come on. This is what was going on at the time. You couldn't just be like, oh yeah, I'm Chris, and here's my here's my conspiratorialist point of view that directly affects the money of the state and the church, but let's just say the general state in general. And we're led to believe, oh, well, they just wrote an honest reflection of what should have been the most embarrassing person to ever show up in their life. Come on, y'all. That's what we asking. That's like saying Chris goes off and starts talking about healing and 9/11 and the moon landing and all this stuff. And the government writes that what I write and maintains the record of my conspiracy theories as the official government standpoint about these events. That's what we're at. That's what we're asked to believe, y'all. That's what we're led to believe. Okay? So, Nero, in case you forget, was the emperor of Rome at the middle to latter half of the 1st century. So when the famous story of Nero burning Christians comes forth, people have to understand it wasn't really Christians. I mean, we can say Christians because they were followers of the man we call Jesus Christ, but it was not Christianity at the time. It was followers of the way, the Nazarenes. That's like the federal government and the CIA murdering dissidents and whistleblowers. It's the same thing. Yeshua's coming up saying, return to the Torah, forget all this extra mumbo jumbo that the Pharisees and scribes added. Never mind what the Sadducees is doing. Their whole system is all out of calibration. Get back to the original. Change your diet, change your life, change your thinking, change the way you view your power in this world, and the kingdom of heaven will be yours right now. Not in the future, literally right now. If y'all don't do this, I'm going to give y'all a prophecy about what's going to happen within this generation shall not pass until all these things come to place. A generation is 40 years. If Jesus was 33, 40 years from 33 years old would be 73. We know that his ministry was 1 year or 3 years, according to which gospel you're reading. So either Jesus was spot on in his math, or he was a complete lunatic. One of the two. Now, you know what my thoughts are. I don't think Jesus was a lunatic at all. I think this generation shall not pass until all these things come to place is exactly what happened. And this generation did not pass. Well, I should say less than one generation later, all these things came to place. The complete destruction of Jerusalem at the hands of their completely illegitimate state and priesthood leadership. And what happened to the Nazarenes? Ants, like ants, just ran like roaches when you cut the light on. They just got out the way. Some of them went to Pella in Jordan. Some of them went to Qumran in the Dead Sea. Some of them went across the way to Beirut and holler at the Lebanese, getting some of that halloumi cheese sandwich. Oh man, the Lebanese food's so good. Oh man, I love Lebanon. Lebanon, y'all, we cool. We cool with you because I like Lebanon. Anyway, spend some time there. Anyway, in this season, between the scattering of Judea at 70 AD and the Roman Ecumenical Council of Carthage in 397 AD, that is 320-ish years of time, okay? There was no Bible until then, okay? So we have the conspiracy theorists and their entire movement becoming infamous from the ground up. People loosening the shackles that the illegitimate Edomite, Sadducee-appointed Pharisee leaders gave them as instructions or a model by which they should be, interfacing with their God and their fellow man. Unless people's righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees, you shall by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. It was homework assignment. I didn't say it. Jesus said it. So, I give you all that time because I need people to understand that this is what actually gets us to the season that bears witness to the first Bible. The whole point of the day is talking about the Bible, and I was long on purpose because I, for my whole childhood, just thought it flowed. At this point, I wasn't mad anymore. I was fascinated. I was legitimately like, this is kind of interesting. Like, I feel like I'm actually getting to the few there be that find it. What's up, Cassie?